I produced a bunch of other people and
Like audio recording?
yeah, like music.
Okay.
Yeah. And I've been getting back into doing that for other people. I've been doing my own thing for a long time, obviously. And on my records, I play everything, and I record it, and it's all mixed by me and mastered by me. Although the last few singles that I've done, I've outsourced.
It's Tony Meade,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Meade.
Yeah.
Any? Are you from Meade, Colorado? That's like the family.
No, I'm from West Virginia originally.
Just joking.
Yeah. Although every time I see that street, I'm like, one of these days I'm gonna get one of them signed.
The Meads. Yeah. That's
I'm gonna get one of them signed.
You could probably have one made. You don't have to steal it.
Yeah.
But it's a better story for sure.
But yeah, I've been getting back into producing other people again, which is really fun. Last year I did a single for this punk band called Team Non-Existent.
Okay.
They're like a queer non-binary punk kind of thing.
Oh, interesting.
Fantastic songwriter and front person named Sophia. So I did that for them, and I've been producing some acoustic stuff for people, and getting back into that world again.
Okay.
But yeah, mostly it's mostly it's time to go back and focus on my own thing again.
Yeah. So how did you get into recording? Or like music? You were just always a musician?
Yeah, and it was like when I wanted to go to school, it was like, well, what's a thing that I can go to school for that facilitates that as much for myself as a job, Yeah. And I mean, for a long time I was a recording engineer. That's what I did,
For what? Or like,
well, I did a bunch of freelance stuff, and then I worked for GC as like a sales guy for a long time, and
GC
Guitar Center.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. And then like consulting and and producing people.
It was a real hustle.
Yeah. Damn. And I was like doing live sound for a long time and stuff
like for venues.
Yeah, like for primarily for either for bands or for like companies that would go out and like say we're gonna have Cinco de Mayo festival. Well, the company that comes out and sets up all the sound. Well, they have to have an in-house sound guy.
Yeah. So you'd be running the board back there.
Yeah.
Okay. And did that include lights and everything, or did they have their own light guy?
Usually it'd be lights as that's a whole separate world. Yeah, a whole separate world. Yeah.
Ideally, huh?
Yeah.
They're like, can you make it look cool as well? While you're making it sound cool.
Mm-hmm.
Any experiences that stand out doing that, or things people wouldn't think about? Any young guy thinking he's going to get into recording?
Well, it's funny because the world is so different now than it was when I went to school. Because when I went to school, you were still taught how to do it the analog way,
which is
like with tape machines and big consoles, big studio kind of stuff,
reel to reel.
Yeah, and everything was it's a totally analog sound path and all that. But so then you would have then apply that to doing recording digitally later. It's like you take that transfer you take that, because all that stuff is set up that way. It's all set up as to mimic that sound path that was originally created, because that's just how audio works, basically. Nowadays, I think there's so much stuff. I mean, you could learn. It's a weird dichotomy, because you could learn everything that you need to know about recording in a month if you just did nothing but do YouTube videos and try stuff, right?
Yeah.
But it takes your entire life to learn how to make records. Because everything's different every time. You have to learn how to work with artists. Every situation is different. Every time you mic something is different. Every room is different. Mixing is different. Tastes change over time, and it's just you have to spend it's a whole lifetime.
Have you read that Rick Rubin book on creativity?
I did. I just read it recently.
It's great,
but
also it's very, I don't know, woo woo in a way.
It is very woo woo in a way. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, it's hard. I can't think of a different word to describe it, because creativity just for creativity's sake and stuff. And so you had to do a little bit of that, producing with other artists.
Yeah, and and you have to learn how to. And a lot of what producing is different from being an engineer. There are separate jobs, and sometimes people will do both, but they are separate functions.
Engineers like actually hitting the
and actually running everything,
the mixer, making sure your bass is up a little more, things like the actual nuts and bolts of recording,
technical part of it.
Yeah.
Whereas being a producer is you're there to be. Everybody has their own way of doing it. Everybody has their own way of thinking about it. My idea is like, I'm here to be the ears of the audience.
Okay.
And what would I want to hear?
Yeah.
Or what might I hear that they don't?
Mhm.
And a lot of it's actually subtractive sometimes. It's actually like, what don't you need? How far back can you strip this back to get to the core of it, you know? And sometimes it's like, let's take this all the way back to like an acoustic song and get that. Once you have that, you can't screw it up. You can just make it better,
Okay.
you know, or just make it different. But because it has to work like that, first of all.
Interesting.
But a lot of times it's just about dealing with, people will say, you know, ego or whatever. It's not really ego. It's about, you know, figuring out a way to translate the technical part of it into something an artist can understand, and vice versa. I wanted it to sound more hot, or I wanted it to sound more, you know, green, something like that. And how do you translate that into, okay, I need to put the mic in a certain place, or use this kind of a thing, or whatever. It's a lot of just sort of translation. Yeah.
Dang.
Yeah. And you're just there to be. And also the other thing about being a producer, if you're on there as the producer on a record, is you're managing things, like you're managing time.
We only have the studio for so much time.
Yeah, you're managing what order are we going to do things, who are we going to get or not, or whatever, budget, all that kind of stuff. Yeah,
Dang.
Yeah,
a lot of moving parts.
Mm-hmm.
I like this idea of thinking about the audience. Is that something that I don't know? Do you feel like that gets in the way of your creativity, or do you think it helps it? Because it can be crippling, I feel like, sometimes for me as a comedian.
It's like, I think about it like this, and it's kind of like we were talking about earlier with the doing the convention stuff.
Okay.
I kind of think about the idea of that being a performer is like a completely separate job from being a creator, right? Because you don't ever do both at the same time. Now, one person can be doing both, but not doing them simultaneously.
Mm-hmm. You're right.
You're either creating or you're performing, and that's because, like, a lot of times that's not the case. You know, sometimes, you know, like, for instance, like TV. You know, you have joke writers who write for the person who's doing a TV thing or whatever, who's not necessarily writing their own jokes. And same with music. You know, yes, you have singers who are also songwriters and therefore performers, but that's not always the case. Sometimes you have singers who don't write and songwriters who don't perform.
Yeah.
So the performance part of it is really separate from the creative part of it. And the performance part of it is, to me, about your relationship with the audience and thinking about that. There's a really great guy that I really like, he's what they call a live music producer, basically, named Tom Jackson. He talks about the difference between dating your audience and being married to your audience, right? So that distinction is like, you know, typically most new artists who are going to go out there and play, you know, or even like a comedian, like playing, you know, whatever, opening, they don't know who you are.
Right.
So your job is completely different from what it was. Like, if they know you, they know your songs, and they're paying to see you play those songs. Mm-hmm. That's a different relationship entirely.
Yeah.
So it's incumbent on you to think about, it's kind of a sales job in a way. How do I manage the energy? How do I manage what I say, how I present this in a way that these people who don't know me, thinking as a, you know, unsigned artist, that I can, not necessarily win them over, but I can at least get them to pay attention, you know, because an established artist, who they're all there to see, they're going to pay attention anyway.
Yeah, they're there.
They can do whatever they want. It's a different world when they don't know who you are, you know?
Yeah.
But that's a completely separate thing from when you're actually making music, you know? When you're making music, it's really, and a lot of people say this, but it really is about you, you know, and what you like. And I said this in a post recently, and I'm glad people got what I was saying when I said it. What I said was, you're not a special snowflake, and that's good news. Because what it means is that people are way more similar than they are different.
Okay.
You know? And you're never going to make something, if you like it, if you really like it, and it appeals to you, there's bound to be a lot of people out there like you who will also like it. Because you're not that different from everybody else, you know? Sure. Which should be comforting, because it means you're not out there all on your own trying to convince the world to pay attention to this thing.
Yeah, but I'm special.
Right. And I mean, and yeah,
You're
you are.
talking about
Everybody
other
has
people,
everybody has
not
their own
me.
voice, but you're not that different that they can't relate to
Sure.
you.
Yeah.
You know.
Mhm.
So in the creative thing, on the creative side of things, I think you have to make the things that you like. For instance, music, you have to make the music you want to hear.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
want to make the record that I want to hear on the radio or I want to hear in my headphones. You know, as opposed to thinking about what do they want to hear or what does the industry want to hear or whatever. Because I know that if I make something I really love, all the weirdos out there who are like me are also going to like it. I just got to find them.
Sure. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
which is the other side of that coin.
Yeah.
You know, because in the world of media, especially media arts, especially, you know, that stuff has really only been around for like a century or so.
Like TV.
Yeah, TV and radio and recorded music and you know, all that stuff. Even mass print is only like 150 years or something like that.
Yeah.
And you know, the world has changed, and for the majority of that time, all of those industries were founded on scarcity. You know, both on the production end and on the consumer end. You know, it was hard. I'll just do music, for instance. It was hard to make a record. It was really expensive. And you had to go to a special place with really expensive gear and specialists who ran it. And that stuff had to be paid for by somebody. So the issue for the artist was to get in the door, basically. How do you get past those gatekeepers so that you can get there to do it? But on the consumer end, there wasn't that much stuff being produced. So there weren't that many choices. There wasn't so much of a paradox of choice. You know, a record label might put out 100, 200 records a year. You know, a big one, maybe 1,000 records a year. Maybe
this is like,
say pre-1980s
okay.
or up into the 1980s.
Okay.
You know, and there were no streaming services. You had to go buy physical stuff or hear it on the radio or, you know, so it was scarce on both ends, which is why you could monetize it. Now, producing stuff comparatively is really easy. You know, if you have just a little bit of money, you can get recording gear, you can learn how to do it, you can do it all yourself. And you can, and the means of distribution are easy. You know, it's easy to put out an album and have it on Spotify and Apple Music and all those things. But the problem is now. Before, the problem was scarcity. How do I get in that door? How do I get just the opportunity to do that?
Yeah.
Now it's how do I rise above the noise,
right,
of everybody else?
The cream.
Everybody else. Yeah. Well, everybody else is doing it because everybody can do it.
Yeah.
So how do you stand out? That's the new problem, is how do you stand out above all that other stuff? And it's the same thing on the consumer side too, because now, you know, I'm old enough to remember when there were like 13 channels, you know, on TV, and it's like there weren't that many shows on, and so any show that was on had a pretty decent chance of being seen. Mm-hmm. Now there's like a million channels, there's all these streaming services, and even the big movie studios. That's why they have to do everything as like a reboot or you know,
IP.
It's all IP based because they need something that will make it stand out from the sea of stuff that's out there that everybody has a choice of what to do. And for an indie artist or an indie producer or any kind of content creator, that's always that is the challenge now. It's not really making it, although it is still a challenge to make good stuff.
Yeah, making good, yeah.
But
like that's the baseline. Just making good things is like the baseline now.
But the challenge in terms of like making that into something that you can actually, you know, make a career out of is you have to get seen.
Yeah,
you know, it's great that it's all democratized, but now there's no. You know, nobody's going to help you. Yeah,
there's no like machine helping you get pushed.
Yeah, and it's like how do you stand out? And it's like you have to have something for somebody to sort of latch onto, whether it's, you know, you're really hot, or you have a really cool story or whatever, or something like it's really familiar. Like, you know, a lot of people have gotten big now doing covers.
Yeah,
you know, because at least people know those songs. They have something.
Yeah, that's interesting.
You know, or by providing some kind of utility like educational content or something like that, you know, something that other people can use that, you know, it's kind of like, so, and that's the quandary for an original artist of any kind, whether you're doing independent film or being a podcaster or like doing your own comedy or doing music or anything like that, is how do I, like, nobody knows you and nobody's looking for you.
Yeah.
So the quandary is the SEO doesn't work in that situation because nobody's looking for you.
Mm.
But they might be looking for, how do I do a thing? And that can be an in.
Yeah.
Or they might be looking for, they pull up the new Billie Eilish single and then they see your cover of it or something like that. It's just finding a way that, to make yourself searchable and findable, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just for anyone who doesn't know, you do your own music.
Mm-hmm.
It's Tony Meade.
Yeah.
Music. Is that where people could find you?
Yes. Yeah. Tony Meade Music. But it's TonyMeadeMusic.com, TonyMeade.com, and then Tony Meade Music on all the socials.
Singer-songwriter over here, guitarist. Do you play anything else?
I play all the instruments on my record. Wow. I'm not particularly good at any of them except being a singer.
Okay.
But I'm primarily a guitarist, but also play bass and keyboards and drums and stuff. I program.
That's some savant shit right there,
It's all born out of necessity, really. Wow. Yeah. It was all born out of it's like that creativity by being put in a box. Like, how do I want to make a record on my own, so I just have to figure it out.
Yeah,
kind of thing. Yeah.
And so is we were talking about the being a lot easier to get out there with your music and stuff and put it out and producing it. Mm-hmm. Is that disheartening, or does that make you feel more empowered as a creator?
It's two sides of the same coin, because on the one hand, it's like, it's awesome that you can, if I want to go make a record this weekend, if I want to record a single this weekend, I can go do it. Mm-hmm. I don't have to pay nobody. I don't have to ask anybody's permission. I don't have to clear it with anybody. I can just go do it. Mm-hmm. And because I've been doing it a long time and I think I'm pretty good at it at this point, I know it'll be good and I can put it out and I can be proud of it. But then the other side of that coin is, how do I get this seen? How do I get this heard? Kind of thing. And that can always be frustrating, And as a live performer, it's the same thing. It's like, you can be really, really good and really well rehearsed. But you got to be able to put butts in seats, because that's your value to the venue.
You got to sell tickets. Yeah. All that jazz.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, yes, your value to the audience is what you can deliver, but your value to the venue is how many people you can
bring. And the
bring.
venue's what's paying you.
Yeah, the venue is how that's who's going to give you the opportunity to do it.
To get out in front of people, get those fans, get those people to care that we're talking about.
And it's also, like in the music industry, you have to think about the live music industry as like a completely separate business.
So it's like going out performing live.
Mm-hmm.
What? Okay.
It's a completely separate business. Yeah. From the record business. The record business used to think it was the whole music business. And it kind of was. But it's not anymore. But it's like, that's a totally separate business. Live music isn't going anywhere. Recorded music, that whole world is changing,
Yeah.
But live music, that's a whole separate world. Like, there's bands, who just play live.
Yeah, I was gonna say, don't most bands, like most comedians, they make all their money touring.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's the big.
That's where they're going to make
money maker.
Yeah, or unless they get like a big special or something like that, But yeah, it's primarily a live thing, which is why COVID was so devastating
for to live stuff.
All the live stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
And bands who make all their, and also it depends on the genre. Like, there's lots of, I know some indie pop, artists, they never play live. Their whole world is the recording and social media and YouTube and all that kind of stuff. And they may occasionally go out and do a thing, but that's not, because the genre doesn't expect that. The genre,
live music genre, or music
just
in general?
The genre itself doesn't expect you to be a live artist.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. At least, especially not at a local level. Yeah. It's all about getting on the radio and getting Spotify streams and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Whereas like a jam band almost never make any records. They're all just, or like a jazz trio or something. They're never in the studio. They're just, that's all they do is play live. So it's just a different expectation because of the genre. Yeah.
Or just out of curiosity, are they respected more as a musician, or like, is it more of a creative if they only do live?
It's different.
It just different?
It's different because, like I said, it's the expectation of not just the musicians in the genre, but the audience too.
Yeah, yeah.
The audience, somebody's going to see a jazz trio or something. They have a different expectation as if you're going to go see a rock band.
Yeah, yeah.
And also, it's also like, I was talking to another singer-songwriter about this recently, about how there's almost like, even within a city, like say Denver as a city, there's a different music business in the city as opposed to, say, in the suburbs. Because in the suburbs, it's all about entertainment. So it's all about covers, playing bar gigs where you play, covers and like tribute bands and that kind of stuff. Whereas in the city, it's, you're expected to be an original artist and be playing original music, and that's a whole different scene.
Yeah, it's right, because like at Comedy Works here, there's two. There's one out in the suburbs at Landmark, and then there's one downtown. Downtown is where you see like the young hip comics coming up, like doing all the edgier stuff, and then in the suburbs club, that's where you get the people you've seen on Saturday Night Live that have a sitcom. That's like where they put those acts.
I think I saw Kevin Smith and Jay Muse there. At the one out in the
interesting
down what is I guess near DTC is where
yeah that's the suburbs. I saw them at the Boulder Theater years ago when they were first doing their Jay and Silent Bob Get Old stuff. Big Kevin Smith fan. I got into that as well.
I really like him a lot, and especially because of where he came from,
like that DIY did it myself thing. Yeah, I mean, he's very encouraging. I mean, what is it about him that really hooks people? When people are into really their stands for Kevin Smith. I mean,
I think it just has to do with him, and I think that says a lot about just, especially in the internet world. I think this has always been true, but I think it's just more highlighted in the sort of internet day, is that people don't really support the art as much as they support the artist. So I think people who are fans of Kevin Smith aren't necessarily like giant fans of his work.
Not every movie.
Or even just like all the podcasts and all that stuff. But they're big fans of him as a person and like what he stands for, and and just like him as a person. Like what
he's very encouraging.
He's encouraging and he's very accepting and open, and and he's been very candid about like health things and his marriage and like all kind of stuff, his life, and so I think that's what draws people in, is they're into him.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. Yeah. So you think a musician would do better, a younger musician coming up in the scene would do better to be more open and as a Kevin Smith, versus whether their songs are lukewarmly accepted?
Well, I think you see that more on social media now, where you see like a young TikTok, right? A lot of people who are artists on TikTok, like I've discovered musicians on there when I'm on TikTok, which isn't very much, but that I didn't even know were musicians. They came up on my feed and they were really funny, or they had interesting things to say or whatever. And only later on did I find, oh, they're an artist. I didn't know that.
Okay.
Which is kind of, there's a balance I think that kind of has to be struck there, because what happens, especially if it's like someone whose kind of appeal is their looks, like they're really good looking, or they have a really unusual look or whatever. Sometimes, and that's what people can get lost in that, and they'd be like, "Oh, then I have no idea." And then the person feels like all I am is basically a model who makes music.
Okay,
and it's kind of disheartening. It's like I came on here to share music, and now I'm just like this face,
right?
But I think the ones who are doing a lot of stuff nowadays, it's like it's either they have a really cool personality that's really suited to that kind of stuff, the short form video, blah 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 blah. They're really funny, they're really clever, or a lot of times it's like they can do really cool stuff, like with covers, like they're just they can do like cool tricks, like cool human tricks kind of thing. But it's like you have to. It's like it's almost like a bait and switch. They're like, I'm going to lure you in with all this stuff, and then hopefully you'll eventually listen to my music.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, like, I remember this great quote, and I want to say it was Dr. Dre. It might have been Russell Simmons, but I think it was Dr. Dre. And what he said was basically, it's like, getting there, it's not your talent that gets there. It's everything else. It's the image. It's who you know. It's, your story. It's luck. It's all kinds of stuff. It's everything else is what gets you there. Your talent is what keeps you there. When you actually get there, if you have the goods, you'll stay there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I just hear that as like talent is the baseline. Like you just have you have to be good, and then do all this stuff on top.
You have to pitch it basically with all this other stuff.
Yeah, that's
just to get people. Because the funny thing in music, I think this is probably different from like comedy, for instance, because comedy, like you can just film yourself doing your comedy, and that is kind of the pitch, But like with music, you have, because it's kind of a big ask to convince somebody to listen to a 4-minute song by an artist they've never heard before and a song they've never heard before. It's 4 minutes of their life, their day that you're trying to get them to do. It's not like a picture, So it's like you have to get them in with everything else, and then the last thing is here's the music.
Yeah, I've been going to this mixed mic down at Western Sky Bar on Tap Rooms Sundays at 7.
Mm-hmm.
He used to do it Fridays, but now he does it on Saturdays. But yeah, like then they do music and comedy as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's like always just funny hearing the musicians tell the story of how they made the song or what was going on. And sometimes it's funny and they can sell it, or sometimes it's like, this is and part of me is just like, just do the song. Because
Right.
I mean, the selling it thing makes sense and all that jazz, but I mean, just like as a comic, I get a lot of just tell your jokes. Just
Right.
go up there and tell your jokes, like, and get out.
Well, the thing that I find the most cringe that a lot of I think comics do this too. And I think this is just true of all performers. I think the most cringy thing that a performer can do is get up there and start apologizing.
Yeah. That's...
For whatever, a technical thing, this, that, or the other, their voice.
Being nervous.
Be nervous. Just do your thing. Everybody's rooting for you. Nobody wants to have a bad time. And they're going to give you a lot of rope, because they want to have a good time. And so they're going to give you a lot of leeway, and they're going to be very forgiving. Most people are.
Yeah, that's a good way. There's some hostile crowds out there, especially for comedy, and you host a music open mic and stuff. So it's nice to hear that, you feel that's how you honestly feel do you think that's something that the host does, setting up top, or is that like the venue, the audience you cultivate?
Yeah, I think the host is probably the most important in setting that tone of because the host is going to have the mic probably the most of that night, and they're going to set the tone of what kind of like for a music open mic. Most of the crowd is going to be the other musicians and anybody who's come with them for the most part. There might be some, sort of Randy's in the crowd or whatever.
Randy's,
but like, and you're going to have whatever, but most of the people are going to be the other musicians, and they're rooting for you. So you have to set this tone as the host of, I'm on your side. I'm going to make it easy for you, where nobody's against you, anything you need, and then you also have to communicate that to the audience, which most of them are there as well. So it's just a matter of saying, hey, we're going to support each other kind of thing. But you don't really have to say that. It's really more about just how you do it. You're sort of
interesting,
Yeah,
because sometimes
and the venue will go along with that because they don't want anybody to have a bad time either.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've been to a lot of comedy shows where the host is just like, guys, shut the fuck up. Like, if you want people to listen to your jokes, you should listen to their jokes, kind of a thing. But like with music, I mean, it's kind of expected that people are talking and like, being in a bar. I mean, that's what I imagined was the open mics at a bar or whatever. And the music is...
It can be a little weird sometimes on both sides because like, I actually kind of prefer to people are talking at least a little bit.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't feel... I've been to some open mics around town, like Swallow Hills like this. Mercury Cafe is really like this, where the expectation is everybody's going to be really quiet and pay attention. That is really intimidating,
right?
And it just feels weird,
too stiff.
Yeah, it's like I'm not leading you in prayer. We're gonna have a good time.
Yeah.
And I would get up there and like tell jokes and stuff, like dearly beloved, that kind of stuff. But trying to loosen everybody up a little bit.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you also go to places like Lion's Lair, where it's like
notoriously
it's just a riot going on most of the time. But the fun part about those ones is that if you can shut them up, you've done something.
Yeah.
You kind of have a gauge. If you can get them to shut up and pay attention at least a little bit, you've kind of done something, rather than because when you're playing in the room that's super quiet, you don't want to have a gauge of what anybody's doing. Everybody's just kind of staring at you.
Yeah. It's funny I've been toying around this idea of doing like a history of the Lion's Lair podcast about the comedy open mic, because it's the longest running comedy open mic in Denver at this point. But I was recently talking to one of the past hosts, Byron Graham. Thanks for doing the show. He was saying that there's a music open mic that's been going on even longer.
So it's on Wednesday nights.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I played there several times. Yeah.
Yeah. It's great. I mean, Lions can be a rough place, but also like a supporting, nice, good. I mean, it's interesting.
It's a weird, because it's weird indie punk dive bar that it's one of those venues that, along with, almost all of them are gone now. The High Dive really isn't, because it's become more of like a next tier sort of venue. But Lion's Lair is one of those, like, every band's played a show there. Like their first show when you first start out. Like, everybody plays there if you're in a rock band.
Yeah.
There were a few places around that were like that back in the day, like Cricket on the Hill, which is gone. 50th Street Tavern, which is gone. there's a few of them around, but I think Lions Lair is the last one standing. Maybe Squire a little bit.
Squire, yeah.
But they just revamped everything. But like in its original form, like Lions Lair is one of those last places where everybody played their first show there.
Yeah.
So it is kind of an institution in that way, but it is a rough dive bar.
Yeah.
And I have a song that I put out several years ago. A lot of people really like it. It's a Christmas song, original Christmas song called "The Dive Bar Christmas Eve."
Okay,
and it's about the Lions Lair.
Oh wow! Okay, cool.
So it's the first Christmas that I was here. I had moved here with my then fiance. We'd split up, and I was kind of here. And then we had, so I was like, that was before Christmas, and so that Christmas didn't have anywhere to go. My store manager had told me, go down to the Lions Lair and hang out, and so it's Christmas Eve. Me and this buddy of mine went down there, and we got stuck in there in a blizzard.
Oh wow!
It was like me and like 3 barflies and like the bartender. And that's where I spent my first Christmas in Denver, was at the Lions. And I wrote this song about it.
Yeah, it's like a romantic story now.
Kind of,
I'm sure
At the time it wasn't.
Yeah,
At the time it was like, what on earth has happened to my life?
Yeah, moved here with the fiance, huh?
Mm-hmm.
And then was it the pull of the music and stuff, or like the artistry?
No, it was more like once I was here, it's like I had the job, and it was just try to make this work, and it just kind of you just kind of live life. Just kind of live life, after that. So
yeah.
No, and then then I got involved with my band and stuff, and then kind of life
goes on.
But that's just that's how it worked.
No, I think one of the through lines with any comic is either they really get into it after a breakup, like this is just kind of a through line. So I was just curious of what happens. But yeah, so I met you. All the music stuff's great. I didn't know. I knew you did music through how I met you was at a Lord of the Rings convention.
Mm-hmm.
So I know you as like the Lord of the Rings nerd. Right. Yeah. I don't mean nerd in like disparaging. You're like a guy. I'm like
Uber. I'm like Uber nerd. Like I make nerds out of other people. Kind of thing.
You're an expert level Tolkien guy.
Right.
Yeah. So I met you at. Would you call Mountain Moon a convention?
Like a conference, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. Because when I try to describe it to people, it's hard.
Yeah.
Because it's not Comic-Con, so you can't just be like it's a bunch of pop culture things.
Yeah. It's like a literary conference, kind of.
Yeah. And specifically Tolkien.
Right.
Yeah.
Or
Lord
mostly
of the Rings.
Tolkien. Mostly Tolkien. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I found out when I went.
Mm-hmm.
So
did you only want to go to the last one or the one before that?
I went to both.
Did you go? Okay, I thought I remembered you from both of them. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I loved it. I don't know. It is so nerdy, but I was so happy the whole time.
Yeah.
It's so different than anything I've done.
I found my people, like that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely something different than I've done before, and it was just I had a dumb grin on my face the whole time just because it was so cool talking to people that were like way more into Lord of the Rings than I am.
But it's like I can say these things that I have in my head, or I know about, or I can ask these questions that I've always wanted to ask. There's somebody there, especially Corey, who's going to probably have an answer.
Yeah. The Tolkien professor, if you don't know, it's like Corey
Olsen.
Yeah. Runs Mythgard Academy. You should check it out. Tons of podcasts and things about Lord of the Rings, and other as well as other pop culture things. But Lord of the Rings was the main.
Right. That was the core of it.
Yeah. So they do these literary conferences, and what I always assumed was that because like people have like presentations. What you did is you brought a presentation, like PowerPoint. It seemed like a college level dissertation about something,
right?
A subject that you deep dived in on Lord of the Rings specifically, or other literary things, because someone brought something about like Japanese monsters, kind of like Pokemon, but like they were talking about something that was like in a toilet. I remember that one sticking out to me.
It was like traditional, like urban fantasy kind of. Japanese monsters.
Yeah, I thought that was very interesting because I just started working for an audio visual video production company called Encore, and they worked out of the Sheraton Hotel. They do a lot of hotel stuff. It was a terrible gig. Never worked there.
Right.
But I started working in this hotel, and these hotels just had these huge bathrooms with rows of like cavernous rows of toilets. And she was talking about this toilet demon that comes out. And I was just like thinking about like, these like, because most of the time when you're setting up things, it's like, no one else is in that part of the hotel, and I was listening to The Shining at that point too, while I was setting up stuff. So it's just like, I just get this like rote thing going in my head. Like, this is a creepy place.
Right.
Hotels are creepy.
Yeah, they are creepy. Because you have a place that's like full, but also kind of empty at the same time because
yeah.
everybody's kind of keeping to themselves, and a lot of people pass through there.
Yeah, there's
and-
no like connection, right? I mean, there's no
Right.
community.
right.
Very, very
Everybody's kind of avoiding
populated,
each other.
but
at a certain-
nobody.
yeah. And there's a lot of, usually if they're older, there's a lot of history. A lot of people have passed through there, and who knows what's going
Yeah,
on.
it's
and-
crazy.
yeah.
But anyway, so I met you at this Mountain Moot was the Denver-based literary conference,
Mhm.
which is such a funny way to put it. The literary, what would you say happens at a literary conference?
It's
for
a lot
someone?
of a lot of presentations, either like educational or whatever, and people essentially doing like either theoretical presentations or like they've taken a look at a particular property or maybe a whole rash of properties from a particular angle. Like the lady was there last time who did the whole thing about asexuality representation in different
Oh yeah, the
characters.
hobbits and different. Yeah.
So it's just and also it's just a place for people to sort of gather as well and
Yeah,
like and
that's- yeah,
discuss things. Like that was one of the reasons why when I set up the last one, the whole theme was about fandom.
Okay.
The whole idea was like this whole idea of a fandom of a group of people who are into this thing and how they interact with that thing, and that's what we ended up with the discussion about about the discussion about Rings of Power within the fandom and ways that's gone well and ways that's gone really wrong and how fandom works.
Yeah,
in
toxic
general.
fandom and things like that
Yeah.
is something we spoke about. Super interesting stuff if it's something you're into.
Yeah. And the presentation I did was about the idea of nerd rock, about music that's being produced out of that fandom, out of and the different ways that can be manifested. Because it's a small sliver of that kind of culture, that kind of fandom culture.
Yeah, it's because like all the like Ed Sheeran was in Game of Thrones.
Mhm. Well, he also did the song for the Hobbit movie too.
Right. Yeah. I do
Mhm.
love that song.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it's just like this pop culture. I don't know.
This crossover between the sort of genre fiction world and the music world, and
Yeah.
where they intersect. And it's also like that is a part of also like convention culture. There are artists out there that like that's their whole shtick is they write songs about fandom things, and then their career is essentially like like these artists that go to different conventions, and that's like their whole, or people who do like Renaissance fairs and then just go from one fair to the next. That's what some of these artists do, like Kirby Crackle from Seattle, and like Harry and the Potters, and like their things. They just go to all these different events and play, and that's their career. They don't have like a mainstream sort of music.
But they found their audience.
They found
like
their
we're
sort of
talking.
niche, and that's what they're doing.
Yeah. And they built up this network that they can tour with,
Mhm. And that's like that's their whole touring schedule. They
Yeah.
just tour to the different conventions. Yeah.
yeah, that'd be an interesting life for
Mhm.
sure. I mean, getting to play to your audience is
Mhm.
great. I can't imagine.
It's one of those like 1,000 true fan kind of things.
Right.
Like if you can have enough people that are interested in seeing you don't need that many. You're playing 25 conventions in a year. How many people do you need to make money off of for each of those to make a living?
Right. Yeah. I just read a book. It's by Pat Flynn. I think it's called like Superfan, but it's like that
Mhm.
theory, whatever, that principle of like you only need 1,000
1,000 true fans. Then,
true
yeah.
fans, which are
Mhm.
like somebody who's willing to invest financially, I guess,
Yeah.
into your career.
It's basically somebody who's, I think the original definition was a person who's willing to spend at least $100 per year on whether that's like 2 tickets and 2 t-shirts at a show or buying a CD or whatever, all that added up over a year, $100. If you have 1,000 of those, that's $100,000 a year.
Yeah.
And that was the original concept. And of course that would vary depending on your thing, but the idea is that you don't have to be a megastar to be able to make a living.
Right.
But once again, you got to find that audience.
Yeah.
And it's like, and it's a different level of commitment from say like a normal fan, or somebody who's like aware of you, and likes you, but wouldn't necessarily pay to go see you or something like that. It's like a different level of fan,
Right.
So you gotta like, it's almost like a numbers game. You kind of, I don't know, like an order of magnitude each time you go wider, but they're going to be more casual as you go out.
Sure.
Mhm.
Yeah. So how did you get into this convention circuit?
Well, the main thing, so I started going to Denver when it was still Denver Comic Con back in 2012, and that was the first convention that I'd ever gone to. Of course, I knew about Star Trek conventions and big Comic Con.
We'd all heard of them.
Yeah, and they were really starting to become a thing. And it was 2012 was when they had the first one here, which coincided, with like the Avengers came out and Dark Knight Rises came out. And it's this big, surge in sort of nerd culture. Yeah. And I think it was right on the verge of The Hobbit coming out and stuff. And so I would go to the conventions. I volunteered there, and I would go every year. But the main thing that I saw was there wasn't a lot of fantasy content in general, and the stuff that was there was a lot of it was Harry Potter or something else.
Nothing wrong with
There
Harry
wasn't.
Potter.
I mean, I like Harry Potter, but there wasn't a lot of Tolkien content,
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
really wanted. And there was some Game of Thrones stuff, but there wasn't like a lot of Tolkien content. And I kept thinking to myself as I would look, and I would go, none of this stuff would be in the mainstream the way it is if Tolkien hadn't gone there first. You know, even the idea of world building and building like a coherent universe, that's an expectation now. But that wasn't that's a post-Tolkien thing. You know, the idea that you would have a coherent universe that makes sense within its own box. You know, Star Wars is a thing. You know, that doesn't exist without Tolkien.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be accepted.
Dune doesn't exist without Tolkien.
Yeah, none of that stuff would exist without, and because prior to him, especially in fantasy literature,
there was nothing.
Well, world building was Once Upon a Time,
right? Yeah,
you know, and nobody cared about who the princess's father was, or what languages they spoke, or what the relationship was between this place and that. Nobody cared. It was a story, you know.
Yeah, it's like we're in King Arthur's court, and that's it.
But if you're trying to propose to people that this is an alternate history of our own world, then you have to back that up, you know. But
which is what Lord of the Rings is.
Which is what it is actual history according to Tolkien.
Yeah, according to Tolkien.
But so I would go to these conventions, and I went to some other ones too, like some in Orlando and this and that. And there just wasn't a lot of Tolkien content at all, and the stuff that I did see wasn't done very well.
Okay,
you know, not necessarily they didn't know what they were talking about. They just weren't really good as a presenter. They just didn't know how to present it in a way that I felt was good for people who didn't know the stuff, and that wasn't dumbed down to people, like for people who were really into it, where it was too basic for them.
I think there's a through line if you're thinking about the audience.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, I could do this better.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, and then I was like, how do I feel like I need to serve myself as part of that community as much as anybody else. So like all of the other me's out there who are really into this, but aren't getting that kind of content, well, I need to provide it, you know? So I just had this idea, like I should do it. I think it took me like a year or two to finally decide to do it.
Sure.
And so I think it was 2018 was the first one I did. It was still Denver Comic Con at the time. And so I created this panel called Why Tolkien Still Matters.
Okay.
And the idea at the time was it was kind of like a sales pitch, because at the time the Hobbit movies had ended. And nobody really knew what was going to happen with the IP at that point.
They weren't as big as the original trilogy. So
and nobody really knew what was the future of the IP was going to be. Where they, you know, if anything was going to get made at all, were they going to remake stuff, or nothing was going to be done. But there was still stuff being released, like the new books that Christopher was putting out and stuff like that. And so it was originally going to be like a sales pitch, like, no, really, this is why he's still so important to all this other stuff that you love as much as his own stuff. But then in the meantime, that's when the Amazon series was announced, the whole buy-in, the $1 billion or whatever it was that Amazon spent, that happened. And then it became, I don't really have to sell people on this, but I do feel like I want to explain it. Like why? So it's like, no, really why it became, no, this is why.
Yeah.
That this still is so important and why it's still so influential. And it became this really big sprawling thing. It became a real big overview, but it went over really, really well. And I was actually told when I left that day that panel had been the biggest non-celebrity panel of the whole con.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Most well attended, and it got the best writing, the best ratings, and I got people wrote about it on Twitter, and
cool.
And I was like, okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
So I think the next year I did 2. I did the same one again plus a new one, and it was all about the non-Middle Earth stuff. And then 2020 happened. There wasn't any convention that year.
Yeah. But
I've done it every year since. I think 21 I did 3 panels, 22 I did 5 panels, which was crazy. And last year I did 3, and this year I only did 1. I think they're getting a lot more people coming back and doing stuff, so I only could do 1. But yeah, I've been doing those ever since, and yeah, they're always full, and people are really engaged, and it's really fun. It's because it scratched the itch that I wanted somebody else to do.
Yeah,
gotta
do it yourself.
Yeah, it's like I wanted to present the stuff that I wanted to see.
Yeah.
And a lot of the stuff that I've done panels on hasn't necessarily been lore. as much as some of it has. The one I just did was it's called Concerning Hobbits, so it's all about the hobbits, but both inside and outside the story, like why they're important in the story and why they're important in the sort of the outside of the story, you know, cultural influence and why they were important to Tolkien and so on and so forth.
Whether they wore shoes or not.
That was part of the discussion. But so that was a little more moralized, but a lot of it's about sort of Tolkien himself and like his creative process. I did one that was basically like, let me show you the whole, like a brief overview, like here's the sort of thread, the history of how all this stuff was developed and as it was published and so on and so forth. And then I just did one about the languages and, you know, all the influences on that and how that was so important. And so a lot of it's about him more than actual
the man
book lore. Yeah. And his process and what his influences were and how he's influenced others. And
did you watch a Tolkien movie? I did. Tolkien.
I did. I liked it.
I mean, it's just crazy.
But I felt like it was made for me anyway.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
you know,
for the big fans.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's just like, how many authors have gotten biopics on? I mean, it's like him and fucking Shakespeare are like the only ones I can think.
I think they did one for Poe at one point.
Oh,
It was like semi-fictional take on like the Raven or whatever.
Yeah, and he was like solving murders or something like that. Yeah. I mean, that's a high praise though. I mean, just like, you know, that's just how big he is.
I thought it was well done. And, you know, obviously they're going to change things, and, you know, but I thought the thing that really stood out to me about that movie was the soundtrack. The music I thought was really amazing. And I've like, that's a soundtrack that I've gone back to and listened to. Again.
Okay. Interesting.
Because it just felt like, it's like, you've seen Tolkien's paintings. It's like somebody took that painting and put it to music.
No, interesting.
You know, it had an ethereal quality, but it was also very sort of organic, but it has this sort of like ethereal thing going over the top of it.
Okay.
I just thought that the soundtrack was amazing.
Interesting. Yeah. I think the last, besides the original 3 Lord of the Rings soundtracks I loved, I have those on CD. The only other one I really got into was Pirates of the Caribbean. That first one, I don't know, for some reason that one got me.
Yeah. I have a dream that I would love to be a film composer.
Yeah.
Because I love movies and I love music. And I just think that whole process is really interesting.
All right, throwing it out there. Anybody looking for somebody to compose?
I've done some music for film before.
Okay, cool.
But it would
ever
be,
done like a
fun.
sketch? I was thinking about doing like a funny sketch where, I don't know, I was trying to think of like the worst thing. Have you put like music to it?
I'm sure you could probably find some like.
I puke on a dentist. What would you do? You could do like an ethereal thing over that.
Yeah,
huh?
you could probably. Yeah, I'm sure there'd be like a Benny Hill soundtrack over that.
Okay,
or something.
Yeah, just a lot of banjo.
Yeah. But like I really loved like the Game of Thrones soundtrack. I think is amazing. Actually, they did a tour of that. Ramin Djawadi, who's the composer, did a tour, and he had like this core of, I think it was 5 or 6 musicians who were like specialists. They played a lot of like ethnic instruments, like they were specialists. But then he would have whatever the local symphony was come out and play, because they had the score and they can just play off the score, and come out and do like their choir and all that stuff. And they would, and so he was here in Denver. He had the Colorado Symphony and their choir. If he's in Dallas, the same there.
Yeah, when are they going to do a live choir thing to a Lord of the Rings movie? Because they did it to Batman, right?
Yeah,
They've done it to Harry Potter.
I've seen them do it. Did the symphony? The symphony did do it for the Lord of the Rings soundtrack.
They did?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think they did the Film of the Rocks, I think, actually.
Dang.
Yeah.
Crazy. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, it was fun.
You were there?
Yeah, I was there.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Right on.
And I've seen it. They seen them do it for Star Wars as well and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the first presentation I remember you doing was something about the 3 rings.
Right, it was about the Rings of Power. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that was really more my sort of take on it, like me thinking about it as someone who's been sort of interested in, you know, all this kind of esoteric stuff. Yeah, all that, all this kind of esoteric stuff, you know, like whether you're talking about astrology or alchemy or all this kind of stuff, you know, the kind of forbidden knowledge kind of stuff.
Okay, yeah.
Because there's through lines through all this, and the thing that's the through line is the idea of the elements, you know. So when I heard, you know, you read Lord of the Rings and you see, you know, the Ring of Fire, the Ring of Water, Ring of Air, it's like ding, ding, ding. And it made me think about it. And it's like, I would never think that Tolkien is like, oh, he's being influenced by tarot or astrology or whatever. But all of those things are drawing from the same well. They're all drawing from this tradition that goes back to, you know, classical times, really. And And so he's drawing from that same well. And when you put those things next to each other, it's revealing, how the element of fire is represented in tarot or astrology or in other things, or the Harry Potter with
I remember using
Gryffindor house, and
that's when you really got me.
Yeah, and then it's like, wow, and then it's like, okay, well, here's the ring of fire.
It all.
Yeah, so that tells you something about Gandalf. It tells you something about the ring itself. It tells you something about its place in that group. Yeah. And then the natural question is, well, what about Earth? You only have 3, so why is Earth separate? Well, you have the dwarves. The dwarves represent Earth, because Aule is the Earth god or whatever, pantheon. And then it's like, okay, well, then what about the 9? Well, you have this idea of a 5th element, and it just all kind of just started to make sense to me. And I said, like, Tolkien knew all of this stuff, because he was a medievalist, and he had knew all about all this, the alchemy.
He studied medieval literature
and mythology and folklore and all this stuff. He knew all this stuff, and so so it's like, I'm sure it's like he might not have even been conscious of it, but it's just he's drawing on this well of tradition that all this other stuff is drawing on the same well, so they're all going to come kind of the same conclusion. And then of course put through the lens of his own beliefs. The Christian beliefs,
the Catholic.
So that just, and then like thinking about it in terms of alchemy, and we have sort of Sauron set up as the alchemist, essentially trying to control all the elements and sort of make them do his will, which is what the alchemist is supposedly doing. And just all sort of fell into place. And I was like, this totally makes sense. Like, my reading of this.
Did you set out to write a paper like this and everything came together, or were you just
I just kept thinking about it, and the more I thought about it, I was like, I need to write this down. Like, I need to have this.
So you felt a need to, write it.
Yeah, I felt a need to, I need to, and like with that kind of stuff, I eventually did write a written version of it, but like all the presentations that I've done got written as presentations. They got written essentially in PowerPoint.
Okay.
Because I knew the stuff that I wanted to say, so it was like, you hear me create this sort of presentation, knowing what I'm going to say in front of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is just like another version of creativity. I mean, like I think about a joke, something funny, and I can link this to the different things, and you're just thinking of, the literature things that are coming together, and how do I funnel this into a presentation?
The one that really got me thinking of, it's like, I think I might have something here, was actually making the connection between the Ring of Water, Ninya, Galadriel's story, and Slytherin House.
Okay.
In Harry Potter.
Yeah, Galadriel a little darker when she's
about, because she was like,
she wants power.
She's all about ambition.
Yeah.
And she's kind of manipulative in a lot of ways. And sort of, it's kind of Machiavellian, but like, and so there's stuff going on with Galadriel. She is a good character, and she is a good person, but there's stuff going on with her, and she admits it, so having that and saying, oh yeah, water element in Harry Potter is Slytherin. What are they known for? They're known for ambition. They're known for Machiavellianism, opportunism.
They live under the lake.
They're trying to they live under the lake, literally. They live in the dungeons, which are under the Black Lake. So they're associated with, and it's like, oh yeah. And then knowing Elrond has the Ring of Air. Well, the Ring of Air is the chief of the rings. Well, who's the chief of the Valar? Manwë, associated with air. Blue, just like Ravenclaw. Ravenclaw is associated with air. It's all about knowledge. It's about memory. It's about learning.
They live in a tower.
Yeah. So what's Rivendell associated with Elrond? He's the lore master. That's his domain.
Interesting, yeah.
And it was originally given to Gil-galad, who was the High King. It's the chief of the ring, so it was given to him. So it's like, this all kind of lines up. It starts to make sense. And going back into the history of Middle Earth, you realize that wasn't instantaneous with Tolkien. A
lot of retconning.
Yeah. Well, he did a lot of different versions before he presented that as the sort of final version. Yeah. And I think he eventually sort of like came there because he had all that stuff in the background, and he was trying to work it out in a lot of different ways, and eventually just all kind of fell into place. But it was where he got to. It wasn't where he started.
Right.
Yeah.
You ever get an Avatar, the last Airbender stuff?
I haven't, but it's a thing I should do because of the whole elements thing. It's another, but I have used it as an example. Like, here's another thing where, this 4-element system is, it's survived into modern times is through that idea of these 4 elements thing. Because that's something that goes way back, classical, maybe pre-classical times. Like our medical system was, for the Galenic medical system for probably 2,000 years was all this idea of these 4 elements and like the different, like the black
The
bile, and,
humors.
the humors and all this stuff. But people went by that. I mean, up until the early modern period, up until like the 16th, 17th century, like that was the medical system for forever. Yeah. So it survived and all these other things. And the way it's surviving now isn't necessarily with like, your Wiccans and New Age people who are into like all that kind of stuff, but also, through pop culture stuff like Harry Potter and Last Airbender and stuff like that.
Yeah, for some reason I was having a hard time saying that too.
Yeah.
But I loved it. I mean, the Last Airbender stuff so good.
That's one of those things like, okay, one of these days I'll go back and watch that. Yeah.
Where I did that during the pandemic. My wife got me into it and I just fell in love with it. And then there's been comic books runs. There's been books, they're kind of YA novels, but they're good. And I'm just listening to the most recent one that came out. It's very, very good.
Cool.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I enjoy that stuff. The elements thing just always kind of falls into place. It's very interesting stuff.
Because it tells you, like the Harry Potter example, is like when you know what somebody's house is, it tells you about them to a certain degree. It's kind of like in Tolkien where when you know enough about the languages, you can see the translation of somebody's name. It tells you something about them.
Okay,
It's like, you realize that Arwen literally means royal lady. The queen, of course, it's like the name has to be right first. It's sort of like, and it's sort of like name is destiny kind of thing. But also that element association, say in Harry Potter, well, if you know someone's a Ravenclaw, it tells you something about that person, like, in Harry Potter lore, like Hermione was almost what they call a hat stall, because it took the hat so long to decide whether or not she should be in Gryffindor house or Ravenclaw house, because she was so intellectual and and book smart and all that kind of stuff, and in her head she kind of should have been in Ravenclaw house. So why did it put her in Gryffindor? Well, that tells you something about her as a person, her character more than
her bravery,
not necessarily her proclivities.
Interesting. Yeah. But all kinds of fun lore stuff. I love the whole, theory videos. I listen to the Super Carlin Brothers stuff all the time. They're great. Yeah, those guys are great.
Yeah,
super in depth.
They've gotten some really wrong to the point where Rowling has told you told them they've gotten this wrong, but they've gotten some really right.
Yeah,
like the Nagini thing. They had a really good theory about Hagrid's wand.
Oh yeah,
remember that one?
Yeah, he got it broken, and
then it was Dumbledore fixed it because the idea that somebody might have saved his life fighting against Grindelwald.
You're right,
as a reward.
I wish we could have seen the rest of those, or at least been written in books or something. Like, so we could have had the full story, as opposed to the abbreviated last movie, because they were like, we don't know if we're coming back.
Yeah, it doesn't look like they are either.
No. Yeah, she keeps stepping in shit with that, for sure. That was something I think we were speaking about at the last Mountain Moot was dead authors can't can't say.
Dead authors are awesome because they can't say anything stupid and ruin it.
They can't.
Although that's not necessarily true, because I don't remember the whole thing about Lewis Carroll that came out recently, where somebody discovered that apparently Alice Liddell, there was some scandalous stuff going on with Alice Liddell as she got older.
Okay.
Yeah, just look it up.
Okay.
It's not okay, but so like even like 100 years later, you can still upset people. If people find stuff
that's
out.
True. It's a little more easy to forgive them, I guess, or just to separate the art from the artist at that point. With the dead person,
there's enough distance there.
Yeah.
Well, I think another thing we talked about with the whole fandom thing there is like the way people try to appropriate Tolkien to their own thing. Whether it's a liberal thing or conservative thing or a racial idea or an idea about gender or whatever, everybody kind of appropriating stuff, and it's like that's the dark side of what he talked about applicability. That it's not a direct allegory. You can apply it to whatever you want. That's great, but people will then apply that to a lot of some kind of extreme things. And so that's the dark side of that. It is widely applicable, and so people will apply it.
I remember when I first learned that it wasn't an allegory for World War II or World War One. My mother-in-law was like, "Oh, it is," and I was like, "No, it's not."
Right.
But she was like, "But it can be." And I was like, yeah. So she was saying like, because it can be, then it is.
Right.
And I was like, I don't think that was the original intention. But
that's not how allegory works, because allegory is created with that intentionally, and that's the only correct reading.
Right.
And all fiction, I think, is inherently allegorical.
Yeah.
There's always going to be allegorical elements in it.
Just like the nature of the medium.
It's just the nature of fiction, basically. Yeah. But an allegory is something different. An allegory is trying to force you into a particular way of thought and a particular way of thinking about it. And I think personally that one of Tolkien's objections to the idea that people accuse the Lord of the Rings of being an allegory is that he didn't like the idea of people seeing it as just an allegory, that the story itself didn't matter. Forget the story, forget the plot, forget the characters, forget all the themes, it's just this one thing.
Yeah.
When there's so much more that he put into it, that no, pay attention to what these characters are doing in this story, what's happening in the story. It's important.
Yeah.
That's just the top layer. All this other stuff is beneath it,
Yeah.
Because it just reduces it to something oversimplistic. Yeah.
I mean, I love fiction. I love Lord of the Rings. I love, fantasy, big genre I'm into. But I'm also into like stoicism. I'm also like, it's like the other side of the coin, I think, or, they're both extremes, I feel like. And some of the people I talk to are, my buddy, a friend of the pod, Ethan Everhart, he only reads like historical books, like biographies on presidents and stuff like that.
Right.
And I feel like I kind of get the vibe from him. He's like, why would you even waste your time with something that wasn't real? But I mean, like, can you just speak to the importance of fantasy, or like why you like fiction?
The best person to talk about it is Tolkien himself, which is on Fairy Stories. On Fairy Stories, where he talks about the importance of fantasy fiction, or fiction in general, but fantasy fiction for adults, because one of the complaints that he has is the fact that even in his own time, that it had been sort of relegated to like a kid's thing. And he's like, no, adults need this way more than kids. And one of the reasons for that is the idea of what he calls recovery. The recovery of wonder. Because for a kid, everything is wondrous. From a psychological perspective, one of the reasons why time goes slower when you're a kid is because everything experience that you have is novel.
Yeah.
So your brain is being wired up with new memories. In order to save space, when you start having repeating experiences, it doesn't wire up any new memories. It's just like, so you can drive to work and not remember doing it, So you have less new memories for each period of time as you get older. So time seems to go faster, right? But for a kid, everything's wondrous. The first time you encounter, a bat, or the first time you see a snake, or the first time you go to the ocean, it's all wondrous. You don't need sea monsters for it to be wondrous,
Right, yeah.
It's all wondrous. Snow is wondrous, But for an adult, you kind of seen it, you've done it, And the idea is to make you reconsider those things, whether you're talking about like political stuff, or philosophical ideas, or trees. You cannot read The Lord of the Rings and not think differently about trees.
Right, yeah.
By the time you're done listening to Tom Bombadil talk about it and hearing Treebeard talk about it, you can't look at a tree the same way. You think, oh yeah, that's a living thing.
Yeah.
That has consciousness in some form and is alive and has a history and has been here for a long time. And what is its experience of the world? And it's like, and isn't it tragic when they get taken down by a storm, or somebody cuts them down out of spite or whatever, You're allows you to re-see the world in a way that you recover that wonder, and also like escape. He talks about
escape is a big one.
Like you wouldn't, if you had a prisoner of war, you would escape is like a virtue. Like being able to escape. If you're in a world, the only way that you're going to get out of it is if you imagine it. You have to be able to imagine being out. You have to be able to imagine something different in order for anything different to ever be, but also the idea of catastrophe and all these ideas that are things that we need, and we need them more as adults than as kids.
Catastrophe is something good happening.
The sudden turn toward the good. Yeah.
It along the lines of Deus Ex Machina, but different.
It is
but
different.
Tolkien's version.
It is different because Deus Ex Machina basically says that the story doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
Because the
all
Greek
this
god just came
it
in
just
and
comes
just,
down and just takes care of everything, and nothing that happened up until now matters. Whereas the eucatastrophe is dependent upon the events of the story.
right.
Like the eucatastrophe of the ring being destroyed at the end of the Lord of the Rings only happens because Frodo was willing, not able, willing to try to get to Mount Doom.
Right.
You know, and a lot of that goes back to like, you know, the Christian belief of grace. You know, the world is saved by grace, not by necessarily by works, but the works set it in motion so that providence can intervene.
Yeah.
And that anything can be used for good, like Gollum's greed, you know, can be used for good because nobody, like, you know, people talk about, oh, Frodo failed, Frodo, blah, blah, blah. But guess what? He failed later than everybody else would have.
Yeah, for sure.
Know?
Yeah.
And his job wasn't, Gandalf knew he would never be able to throw the ring in the fire. He couldn't do it in Bag End.
Interesting.
You know?
Yeah.
It was just a matter of, we just have to try.
Right. Yeah.
Because the Fellowship, the reason why, you know, Elrond was willing to say, okay, these 4 weird hobbits can go, is because he understood that it was an impossible quest.
Right. Yeah.
You know, but they were obviously being shown that they had to try. So it was the coalition of the willing, not the coalition of the able.
Right. Yeah.
You know, nobody was going to be able to do it.
Glorfindel would have gone. You know.
Yeah. Nobody was going to be able to do it.
Right. Yeah.
And we just need to find the people who are actually willing to do it and willing to just
willing
lay
to try.
lay it all on the line.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, and then eucatastrophe will intervene. Hopefully.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I mean, you put it so eloquently. Whenever I get in arguments might be a strong word, but whenever I get into discussions with people about Tolkien and they try to undermine it, I mean, it's like, no, it's so great. And I can't articulate it. So, I mean, it's always good to hear somebody
the other defense I have is Frodo is that Frodo's quest was not to destroy the ring.
It was just
it was to save the Shire.
Right.
That's what he set out to do. When he left, that was he didn't know he was going all the way to Mount Doom.
Right, yeah. He thought Rivendell.
He thought Rivendell, and then who knows? Maybe I'll retire there, you know. But his quest was to save the Shire, and he did do that.
Right.
You know, through the destruction of the ring was, you know, it was necessary to do that. But they also had to come back and do the whole scouring and all that stuff. But then that's why he tells Sam, he's like, we set out to save the Shire, and it has been saved. I accomplished what I set out to.
But not for me. It's so tragic.
Yeah.
Yeah, those things
Which
always
is essentially the ball they dropped in Game of Thrones, because that was the ending they were supposed to give Jon Snow.
That he saved the realm,
saves the world, but not for him. And you kind of get that a little bit.
Yeah,
you know?
He goes off and
he smiles. He realizes, and you see the snow melting, and it's like, yeah, he did save the world, just not for him. He didn't.
It's always so tragic.
Yeah. But then again, does he want to be king? No, he doesn't want to be king.
Yeah. Well, in the book, I watched this video actually where they're talking about in the books, he wants it more than TV Jon Snow wanted it.
Right.
TV Jon Snow always saying, I don't want it, I never want it, blah, blah, blah. But in the books, he feels conflicted because he does, you know, I mean, part of him wants power, you know.
Right.
It's
it's the ambition of youth.
Yeah.
But I think that gets tempered out of him after a while. When he sees, but also seeing like all that stuff that's going on with Stannis.
Yeah.
And, you know, and Melisandre and all that stuff and all the politics and all that stuff at a certain point, because he was raised by Ned Stark, who had no time for any of that stuff. You know, he starts to see what Ned saw. And there's a reason why Ned didn't stay with Robert in King's Landing and went back home. You know, he didn't want no part of it.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
when he was able to come back before the show started.
Yeah. And he was able to go back and raise his kids and be Lord of the North and live his life and not deal with all this nonsense, you know.
Yeah.
And so when Robert comes calling, it's, you know, it's
almost
like
a death sentence in a way.
It's a death sentence. It's either I don't think he thinks it's a death sentence for him personally, which it ends up being.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a death sentence for his peace.
Yeah.
You know, that this life that he's built that's over now.
Yeah, that sucks.
Because of his idea of duty. You know, the king asks you, you got to do it. You know, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think John had enough of Ned that he starts to see all that stuff. He's like, I don't want any part of this. And being around the wildlings and their whole life, the free folk and all this stuff, he did start to change after a while.
Well, I mean, it's funny because I think about all that stuff. Stoicism is like, you know, being your best self and blah, 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 living to these higher standards and all that jazz. But it's like nothing's black and white. And the only time, you know, people do, I mean, and it's kind of was in these fantasy novels where people were able to, you know, overcome, you know, these certain things and be honorable and all that jazz. I mean, that's kind of not the trend now. It's like, it's more of like, oh, everything's gray and there's, like all the stuff. I don't know if you're watching House of the Dragon, right? All the stuff they're doing with the White Knight, the Kingsguard guy. And he was like, I tried to be honorable, but like, maybe
humanity involved and, invaded that. And now it's kind of ruined.
Yeah. It's like all these stoic tenets and like things you're striving for, I think, are embodied in a lot of fantasy stuff. The king that did rise above.
A lot of that goes back into like Norse mythology, where you have these people being put in impossible positions where they have to choose between like family or a duty, or like there's a civil war in a family, and like their brothers on one side and their fathers on the other side, and like, well, who do you go with? Or conflicting oaths. Like Jaime Lannister is a great example of that, where you have this conflicting oath where he's sworn to protect the king, but the king is a horrible person who wants to murder thousands of people. So what do? Do you save the city because you're also your knightly vows are to protect the innocent,
right?
So what do? And you have vows to your family, and your father's marching on the city, on the other side. So what do you do? And he does the only thing he can think of, which is, I'm going to save the people. He's about to set this whole city on fire and kill 100,000 people or whatever it is. I'm going to kill him before it happens. I'm going to stop it. It's the only thing he can think to do. And he, in a way, it's the most honorable thing that he does. It's the most, but at the same time, he did stab a king in the back.
Yeah. That's the thing.
And it destroys his own honor for the sake of hundreds of thousands of people who will never know what he did, But I think one of the things that I think Martin, I don't even think he's aware of it sometimes, but that he lives a lot in the same moral universe as Tolkien, but without realizing that he is. And one of the things that he really emphasizes is things about leadership and what good leadership is versus bad leadership. And the idea that good leadership is an act of service,
right,
to the people who you're put in charge of, and so you see, like with Jon Snow rises, but he rises through service. He rises through sacrifice.
Night Watch and all, is all about
he goes to the Night's Watch. He goes off on this mission where he basically sacrifices his own honor to be with the wildlings, and he's able to come back and save the wall and do all these things. And he rises because he continues to serve. He doesn't give into his own personal things to leave the wall and
go be king
and go or go
Winterfell.
Go do Winterfell and be with Robb and all this stuff.
Yeah.
So there's that, but also Daenerys is the perfect example where you see this dichotomy, where you see her. Like, Jon doesn't know that he has a right to the throne, but she does.
Yeah.
She's different. And
she's built different.
Well, she is built different. She's fireproof, first of all, which is not a thing in the Targaryens, by the way. In the books. But like, she has these two competing things, and one is her rights and all about her rights and her privileges as a Targaryen princess. And then there's her sense of duty to other people, and wanting to do right and do good in the world, and when she follows the impulse of, I want to do good for people, I want to free the slaves, I want to get rid of all these horrible systems that have existed for millennia, I want to, all these different things that she wants to do. Breaking the wheel. She wants to do all these things. And when she does that, she gets it right and things go well. When she gets all fire and blood and she's like, my rights and my dragons and my throne and my and that's when she goes wrong.
Interesting.
And she's a person who's balanced on this knife of which way is she going to go? Is she going to go fire and blood, or is she going to go A Song of Ice and Fire?
Yeah.
Is she going to save the world, or is she going to go for the Iron Throne?
Yeah.
And who knows how it'll play out in the books?
I know, because in the books, right, she's still in like Marine, or she's still in a
at the very
slave
end,
city.
At the very end, she's exiled from Marine because she had escaped during that riot on Drogon, and she's out in the wilderness right now.
Then they haven't found her yet.
Yeah, so it's all kind of gone wrong to a certain degree for her, just like it has for Jon. You know,
yeah, he's dead.
He's dead. So,
what do you think she should do? I mean, if you're gonna, because the Daenerys thing, is she gonna just leave like she does in the show? She just kind of leaves them to their own devices, right?
Well, she leaves the guy that she's sleeping with, Dario Naharis. She leaves him in charge and then goes off, which I think is like a bad move. I think it's like,
I mean, she's like I'm invested here.
Why does it have to be Westeros? It's because of her family,
right? Yeah,
it's fire and blood, Targaryen rights, blah 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 blah. Say, why can't you just be the Dragon Queen here? To these people, you're Misa, you're mother of dragons. Why can't you be that here and do good for the world? You have a whole continent. Why does it have to be Westeros? Because she has this grudge that she's inherited.
Damn. Yeah, I mean, and that's like shit happens. I mean, that's like you could see that in like real life all the time. Something that I got brought up. I was thinking of because my buddy, he's always reading. He loves Harry Potter and some stuff like that as well. But like he's always reading. He's like a history teacher, and so he's always talking about Truman. I think he just like was one of the last biographies he read was on Truman, and in one of the last Stoicism books I read by Ryan Holiday, I think it's called Right Thing Right Now. He's like doing a whole thing on like the 4 tenets of Stoicism.
Right.
And the last one that came out was about justice. And he talks about Truman and having just always doing the right thing, and like even at the expense of like his family going hungry sometimes, or just like not having a lot of money. And I mean, just like being that just upholding those values. I mean, even at your own detriment is like a very like fantasy. I mean, I don't know. It's in there all the time.
I mean, like, you see Aragorn. Aragorn is another one of those characters. I mean, Aragorn essentially lives as
the Truman of Harry Potter. I mean,
kind of, because like he's obviously he has this right.
He's
inherited this claim.
Yeah,
but
I love this.
But he doesn't become. But the funny thing is, he doesn't become king because of the claim.
Right. He inherited the ring is a nuke.
Yeah.
Someone else was working on it. He inherited it.
Right. Well, he inherited this claim to the throne. But it's like you're only king if you can prove it.
Right.
You're only king if people let you be king. He's made king in Gondor. Yeah, it's like he has a right, but he's ultimately becomes king by acclamation because of what he does
through service again in a way, like healing people
and like how many he was basically like living off in the wilderness for decades.
Yeah.
In service to other people, in service to the hobbits, in service to Thingol and Rohan, and service to Denethor's father. And
what was his name when he was in like something?
Throngill. Yeah. And living as like this vagabond that everybody looked down on, this weird Strider guy, and even once he's out on the quest, like he encounters Amir for the first time, and he gets kind of challenged by the Rohirrim. How are we to read this riddle? Like, how are we supposed to do it? It's like good and bad haven't changed; they're the same. You have to do what's right,
right? Yeah.
And it's the same reason why he when the Fellowship breaks, he chooses to go after Merry and Pippin. It makes no sense logically, but it makes sense for him.
Yeah, it's like right or wrong.
It's like we cannot let this happen to them. They made a choice. They're going to go do their thing. That's his quest. We haven't signed up to go to the end of this quest.
Right,
but we're not going to abandon them who didn't choose that. Yeah.
See, I just want to live my life doing the right thing like that.
Yeah.
Like, that seems good.
And, I think Aragorn is a character, and I know some people don't like the way he's portrayed in films.
Right, yeah.
I think it's fine.
They Jon Snowed him. I don't want it. I'm not worthy.
But I think it's the self-doubt that's present in the books, because he has this huge thing to live up to. I mean, he is Isildur's heir. He's the heir of Elendil. He's the heir of Numenor. He has this enormous thing to live up to, and he's just a man, and he understands that. It's hard for a man to live up to a legend,
just like Truman.
Yeah, and he kind of
I mean, I get it.
He was the last president. Didn't have a college degree.
Yeah, okay.
He never thought he was going to be president.
Right. Yeah.
But Aragorn has this doubt in his own judgment sometimes, because he's just like, I've been put in this position, and he ultimately just has like, I have to decide based on what I think is right and wrong, and just live with whatever happens, and if that means I'm never, because I think, especially after with exploring the Lord of the Rings, like having gone through Council of Elrond and hearing Aragorn talk, it's like I think he thinks that what's going to happen to him when he goes to Gondor is what happened to Elendil. He's going to die defeating Sauron.
Interesting.
He's taking up the part. He's righting Isildur's wrong by helping the ring be destroyed, but he's there as the heir of Isildur, or the heir of Elendil, to do what Elendil did, which was basically go sacrifice himself to defeat Sauron.
Right.
And I don't think he has. I mean, he knows he has the right, but he can't back that up. And when Faramir brings him forth at the very end, and he says, here's Aragorn, son of Arathorn, blah blah blah. Yes, he says yes. He's year of Isildur, blah, 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 of Numenor. But he also says victorious in battle with the hands that are healing and all these kind of things. He lists all of his accomplishments, and he becomes king not by right but by acclamation. By consent, by people saying we want that guy.
Yeah.
Because he has the claim, but look at all the things he's done.
Yeah.
He should be king.
Going back to the Dr. Dre quote, he's like, he had the talent, and then he had to have the right guy vouching for it.
Right.
He had to have the charisma.
But it's like Daenerys. Daenerys is the same way. Daenerys has a claim to the throne,
but no one likes her.
But nobody likes her because she's a woman. Yeah. First of all, but she becomes queen because of what she does.
Right.
Freeing
the slaves. Being the
being the dragon queen and all that stuff. Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah. I love it. I love all that stuff.
Yeah. And I think, I've read, Lord, so many of the, sort of like whatever you'd call it, self-development books, I've read Ryan Holiday and.
Yeah, I love Ryan Holiday.
Except for him through like Tim Ferriss and all this stuff.
Yeah.
But I really think that after having read all that stuff, but also studying fantasy literature and especially Tolkien, like I feel like you can learn more about how to be a human being from reading fantasy literature. From like a lot of self-help books.
I do like that idea as well.
Yeah, because like
I've gotten a lot
because that's how we communicate as human beings, is through story.
Yeah.
That's why we have, you go back and read like Joseph Campbell, and like this is how we communicate how to be a human, how to interact with the world, how to interact with the divine, how to interact with our own shadow, is we communicate those things through story. Because we that's just how humans are built. We're built around stories.
How do you feel about reading versus listening to audiobooks? Just out of curiosity.
I'm in favor of audiobooks, especially for Tolkien himself. But a lot of fantasy literature, I think, is true. And this is also true of Martin as well, because they're writing in a tradition, and this is especially true of the Silmarillion. They're writing in a tradition of stuff that's made to be read aloud. A lot of people, especially with the Silmarillion as a particular, is that a lot of people can get messed up in it because they're trying to read it like a novel, right? It's not a novel. First of all, a novel is a particular genre, right? It's not just any fiction book that's big, right? But even if you take that definition, it's not a novel. It's a collection of stories. It's more like an Elvish Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
It's a thing that contains their mythology. It's deliberately archaic in language. But the most important is it's made to be read aloud. If you ever go to, you go to a Christian church or an imam or you hear a rabbi speak, there's always a reading from the word.
Mm-hmm.
It's meant that stuff is meant to be read aloud, and the Silmarillion particularly is written to emulate that kind of scriptural content. So it's made to be read aloud. So the first time I read the Silmarillion was in the audiobook.
Yeah, me too.
And I got it immediately because. Even if you don't have to follow all the names and lineages and all that stuff, you just need to get the story, what the story is about. And it's all there in the language and the rhythm and the word choice and all that stuff. It's all there. And I think hearing it read aloud makes it way more accessible than reading it. And then you can go back and study it. Because just like if you were studying scripture, nobody reads scripture on the beach.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, well, maybe some people do, but like it's not a beach read.
The real ones.
You're
we call those the real ones.
The real people. But it's meant to be studied.
Sure.
You're meant to you go back to it over and over again and you make all the connections but the first reading is you're supposed to get what the story is about. It's kind of like medieval literature is like that. If you read like one of the things that Tolkien himself translated, Sor Orfeo, which is a retelling of Orpheus and Eurydice from
love that one.
Greek mythology. But when it's told in the medieval context as Sir Orfeo, instead of Hades, you have the elf king and it's underground and stuff.
Yeah, I'll have to listen.
And there's knights and all this. It's all like it's in a medieval context because the medieval people had no concept of things like anachronism. They weren't there for historical accuracy. Their ideas were like, we want to know what the story is about. What does this mean? It's all about meaning, not plot details and stuff like that. It's and being exactly what because they wouldn't have cared what was going on in Greece. None of them ever visited Greece. Actually I did a Christmas album in 2020, and a lot of them are really old songs, It's called Wassail. It's probably one of my favorite things I've ever put out. But there's a song on there that I did a cappella that's called the Cherry Tree Carol, right? And it's an apocryphal story about when Joseph finds out that Mary is pregnant, and of course she's supposed to be a virgin and all this stuff, and he says, well, let the father, because they're gathering cherries, right, in the song, and he says, well, let the father of the baby gather cherries for you, and the tree bows down to her, right, and he realizes what's going on, right?
Okay, yeah.
Well, there's no cherry trees in Palestine,
Okay.
but the people who, this, and I'm sure other places like an apple tree or whatever, it's like there's lots of cherry trees in England.
Gotcha.
They've never seen an olive tree,
right,
or a mustard tree. They have no idea. It doesn't matter. It's what the story is about. It's what it's trying to tell you, not the plot details of the background or whatever. They didn't care about that kind of thing. Yeah. So the details of those stories don't matter as much as what it's about. And so when you read a lot of fantasy literature, yes, it's set in this other world and lots of strange things, but it comes down to, what is the story about? The story, it's about death, and in the face of that, then what? It's about hope, and about hope versus despair, and and all these different things and that's what you can take from it into your life.
Yeah.
Having Aragorn as an example of a non-toxic masculine hero, who isn't Beowulf,
right?
Who isn't Thor, who isn't Perseus,
Hercules,
or whatever. Guys, who are, a lot of whom are kind of questionable, in a lot of ways. How many times does Hercules go crazy and kill his family?
Yeah, a couple times.
A couple times. So,
not just once.
Yeah. So you have Aragorn as this example, but it's set in a fantasy world, this weird sort of pseudo medieval world where his people are basically the Atlanteans, and
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter, because that's
what's dope.
It's about what that character does in that story and who they are. Yeah.
Yeah. My buddy, he's always getting at me about being like, well, his whole thing is words have meaning. And when you say you read a book and you've listened to it, actually, then you didn't read.
Mm-hmm.
So he's always not cutting me down, but always giving me shit about.
Well, I mean, there's two.
Listening
if you're reading it, you are listening to it in your head.
You think?
Yeah, I do anyway. And as a writer, when I've written a lot of prose, I typically edit it using some kind of text-to-speech conversion.
Oh, interesting.
I go back and listen to it and listen to the rhythm of it, and then I'll know if there's wrong words, if there's repeated words, if there's things that need to come out. You hear it spoken aloud. That's how it's going to be heard in somebody's head.
It's funny because I was talking to a comic, Sam Talent. He wrote a book, and he really loves the beat guys, like beat poets, and like
Kerouac and all that.
Those things. And he was saying that he had a couple novels he read a bunch while he was writing his book, because he wanted his book to look on the page what those books look like and how they read. And I was like, oh, when I listened to it, a lot of it sounded like poetry, very well. And he was like, oh, I never thought about how it sounded out loud. He was so focused on what it looked like on the page.
Right. Yeah.
Which is it's just different.
And how do we all
translated well, I suppose.
Yeah. But how do we all start? We all start with somebody reading to us.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah. And he'd be like, oh, you want to be your baby? You want someone to read you? I'm like, yes, it's great.
Well, for most of history, most people had stuff read to them.
Right. Yeah.
There was a small group of people who were literate or partially literate, and they would read to everybody else.
Yeah.
And that's just how you experienced.
Yeah, I loved it. I love it. I mean, that's how I listen to most things, and how I will for the rest of my life probably. So it's great. I enjoy it.
And it's something you can do, while you're doing other things, if you're walking or whatever. Because I walk a lot. I try to do 10,000 steps a day, and
me too.
And that's something that requires you take time to do that. And so I listen to a lot of stuff because it's very meditative. And that's a good time to just I'm just doing this thing, and I can just let this stuff in. Yeah.
Do you prefer reading, or are you like listening?
Nowadays more listening. More listening. It's hard to find
time. You can multitask in a way.
Yeah, it's hard to find time to sit and read. The when I read typically is when I'm doing some kind of study. Whenever I need to break something down, or for instance, doing a panel, or a paper or whatever. Like the Rings of Power, the Rings of Power one that I did a couple years ago. Corey actually asked me to create a version that could be published.
Oh,
And so there's on this thing called Mythgard Miscellany or something like that. I have to look it back up. But yeah, so I basically what I did is I took that presentation and then created a text version of it with all the stuff that I would have normally said.
and you just created that for fun. Because what I thought was, because Mythgard Academy is an online university for people who don't know.
Yeah.
And what I thought it was like people doing like their last dissertation or something and presenting it at MythMoot was like kind of like their version of like last class final thing.
Yeah.
But I guess that's not what it is. It's just people who really love it doing something.
Yeah. And a lot of it's really specific. You know, I don't know, because
that's why I thought it was so, because it's so specific. I was like, this has to be for his college thing. They have to be like getting their masters in.
I think that's the model
literature
that people use, but people just they're just doing whatever.
Yeah,
it's just some kind of angle on something they want to explore. Like the guy who did the thing about the geology of Moria and what could mithril actually be?
Yeah.
You know, some kind of
Very
alloy of things that would actually be available.
Yeah.
Like I didn't know, this was something I thought was fascinating that he said in that, was that if you pick up any like handful of dirt anywhere in the world, every single element is present. There's gold there's silver there's every single mineral, at least I think, but in some kind of, and at some level, you know. And the difference between, say, like a load of gold and a pocket full of sand is the ratio.
Crazy.
Yeah. There's going to be like, it's just like, even if it's at an atomic level, there's like molecules of gold,
right? Yeah,
in that pocket
it's
of
all
sand
going into the earth and just getting recycled,
and it just gathers in different places, in different intensities, and that's the art of, say, looking for gold is just finding where am I most likely to find the biggest concentration of it, rather than, you know, because it's not
Colorado,
not just in one place.
The gold rush, baby,
and silver and copper, because all those towns, Silverthorne, Copper, all of them, they're all named for that stuff.
What brought you to Colorado?
Well, the fiance, that was the main thing, because I went to school in Seattle.
Okay.
And
Portland.
To what's that?
Said Portland. Washington.
Yeah, I went to school in Seattle at the Art Institute up there back when I was still there, and then I was, you know, with this girl at the time, and she had gone to school at CSU, and she wanted to come back to do her graduate stuff. She had been away. And she had been overseas for a while, so she was able to get enough time to be. The total amount of time that she was gone was under the amount where she could still get in-state
tuition.
Yeah, so she wanted to come back here
and get in-state tuition.
And so I agreed to come with her, and basically, and that's how I ended up here. And then then
you stayed, huh?
Yeah, it's just, you know, life happened. You know,
you didn't think about going back after the breakup or anything? You'd already established.
Well, it was logistically, it would have been logistically very difficult at that point, because, you know, money and all that stuff is a factor.
Just curious.
Yeah. So, and I'm not from here originally. I'm not from Seattle.
I can tell.
Yeah, I'm from West Virginia. Yeah. So, and in West Virginia wasn't really an option either. Not if I wanted to do, you know, music or media or anything like that.
Yeah, there's a big music industry here, so that's why I thought. Yeah, you know,
it was like, I'm here and I'm kind of in it already.
Yeah,
and you just kind of live, you just kind of go on and try to do your thing. That's about it. You know, I got the band, and, you know, things went on. So
awesome, man. Any fantasy other than Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter you're into? Like the Carlin brothers are also into Sound of the Wind.
Okay, that's one I haven't read yet. Everybody keeps telling me the Name of the Wind. Yeah,
it's the name of the first book.
Yeah,
the series is called the King Killer.
Yeah, right.
King Killer Chronicles.
I'm of two minds about reading it. On the one hand, everybody tells me you have to read this, and I kind of want to read it, but I don't want somebody to martin me.
It's so hard. I was just telling my wife, I was like, I'm not starting any more unfinished series.
Yeah, because, you know, I got into Game of Thrones in a similar way that I actually got into Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, which was I saw a piece of media first, and then went back and into the books. So, like with Lord of the Rings, I saw the first film, and literally like 7 minutes into that film, you're like the prologue.
Yeah.
After that was over, it's like, I have to know everything there is to know about this world. You know, before the movie even really started, I was like, okay, when this is over,
you were hooked.
I was in. And so, like, that whole year in between, you know, the year, the first year I read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings in total. And then in between the second and third movie, I read Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales. Yeah. And then that was sort of, I was kind of off from there.
Deep dived right away.
I was in. So, And it was the same with Harry Potter. I got into it after the first film came out.
Because Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter came out around the same time.
They started the same year. The movies.
Because I remember seeing Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and being like, my life will never be the same.
Right.
I'll never have to watch something I don't want to watch again.
Yeah, December's will never be the same for me. See, I started out as a Star Wars kid.
Okay,
that was my thing.
Right.
That was my thing growing up with Star Wars. And I didn't get into Lord of the Rings and stuff because when I was a kid, especially, at the time that I was growing up and where I grew up, Lord of the Rings was this very sort of niche thing. And you were either really into it or you didn't know nothing. And you didn't want to be a noob in that community.
Yeah. Little gatekeepy.
Yeah. So when the movies kind of open it up to everybody,
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, I get it now. I get why people like this so much. Now I'm going to dive into it. I get it for myself.
You're on board.
But I was always the Star Wars guy. I'll be Star Wars forever.
Did you watch The Acolyte?
Yeah. I dug it. There's a lot of things like that where I like. And I was like, there's like the Hobbit movies and stuff, and even stuff like the last season of Game of Thrones. Where I'm like, I like a lot of the stuff they did. Maybe the whole thing didn't land, but a lot of cool things in there, and I'd rather focus on that.
That's how they keep people in,
Yeah, I'd rather focus on the cool stuff that was there than like, oh, they didn't stick the landing, or it's not as good as this other thing, or whatever else. It's like, man, I'm just happy that it exists.
Yeah.
I'm happy that somebody's making this stuff.
Like, I'm there with you on a lot of things. But yeah, sorry, you're saying you were a Star Wars kid.
Yeah. And then I got into all that stuff. And same with Martin too. Like after the first season came out, somebody actually gave it to me. Somebody had like pirated it. I think it was when I was at work.
The show.
The show. Because I was like, well, you like Lord of the Rings and stuff. You'd probably like this. And I'm like, have you seen it yet? I'm like, no, I haven't seen it yet. And so they give me like this pirated DVD, like these kind of lower res versions of all the entire season. I'm like, okay, I'll watch it. And like after the first episode, I was like, okay, I want more of the story. And by the end, I was like, okay, I need to know. And so like, yeah, I read like I think I read all 5 books in about a year between the first 2 seasons.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, man. And then I'm just like, now what?
Yeah.
Because now it's like 2012. The last book came out in 2011, and we've all been waiting since then. It's been 13 years now. So,
yeah, he's definitely in no rush.
Well,
that's for sure.
I want to give him a little bit of grace because of the fact that like it took Tolkien 12 years to write The Lord of the Rings after The Hobbit. After The Hobbit came out.
Yeah, but he did it like boom, boom, boom.
Right.
Yeah, boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, well, he was working. I mean, but also the other, like, look at all the other Song of Ice and Fire stuff that's come out since then. We're talking about Fire and Blood. You're talking about the history book,
History Westeros.
all these different the Duncan Egg stories. There's all these different pieces of stuff that he's done that have filled out that world, and I can't help but think like he's doing that because he needs to pay that off in the main series. Like he needs you to know all this stuff in Fire and Blood. He needs you to know this Duncan Egg stuff because it's relevant to Aegon.
I hope so. Because it's only getting bigger. The world's only getting bigger. It's not getting.
And especially with a fantasy world where he's like, okay, it's there's all these different threads of magic, but they're kind of you have the red god and you have the old gods and you have the
Kraken,
the seven and the Kraken and all these different.
Yeah, what's your
the storm gods, all these different people, and there's some kind of relationship between the old gods and like the dragon dreamers. There's some kind of connection there. Like, what is it? Are the gods real? Are they manifestations of ourselves? Like, and he has to nail that, and he has to try to give you enough stuff to like kind of to understand it, to understand what's going on when it all, especially if if you do the idea of the long night right. That has to be important,
right?
It can't be like it was on the show where it's like one episode and we're done with it.
I know, dude.
He's like, you built this up for 7 years and now it's like, oh, it wasn't that big of a deal. We just stabbed him with his knife and that was it.
Yeah.
It was fine. I like the symbolism of it. I like the fact that it was Arya who did it. Yeah. I like the fact that now they're paying it off with the House of the Dragon with it's like that dagger that has Aegon's prophecy on it is the one that she used. It's kind of cool. I see what they're going for.
Yeah.
I did like some of the things like, Theon sacrificing himself and, the idea of like your redemption through sacrifice and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, Theon, big piece of shit.
Yeah. But, in the end, he tried to do the right thing.
Yeah,
or
after a lot of fucking
like
BS.
Melisandre, like how much shady stuff that she does, like including killing Stannis Baratheon's daughter, like
I know,
all
right?
these awful things that she does, but she thinks she's doing it to save the world.
I know,
And then when
right?
it's saved, she gives up. She lets herself die because her job is done. And there's something interesting about that. It's even like the Hobbit movies. Like as bad as the Hobbit movies were in terms of storytelling, they're actually more lore accurate than the Lord of the Rings movies. And there's a lot of cool stuff in there. Like Martin Freeman, genius casting as Bilbo. You know, Lee Pace as Thranduil. There's no other person who could have played Thranduil. You know, there's a lot of cool stuff in there. You know, I would prefer to focus on like in the Harry Potter series. There's a lot of stuff that's not in the books, you know. And there's sometimes where they didn't stick it. And I thought there's
a lot of things that are in the books that aren't in the movies.
Yeah. And there's a lot of stuff that's in the movies that aren't in the books either. You know, where they've changed it or they've streamlined it and stuff.
Yeah.
Or they've added stuff because they've omitted something earlier, so now they have to do a different thing now. But like one of the faults I thought was wrong with the later movies is that it depended too much on you having read the books.
Yeah.
To really get why things were important and stuff. But it's like there's a lot of stuff. I think of those kind of things as like they're companions to the original. You know, this is a companion piece. Like the Harry Potter movies are a companion piece to the books. You know, like a lot of people, their vision of Harry will always be Dan Radcliffe.
Right.
You know, and that's fine. You know, and that causes problems too, because like a lot of people's vision of Hermione will always be Emma Watson.
Yeah.
So they're not going to think about like when they did Chris Childs, cast a black actress, but there's nothing in the text that contradicts the idea of a black Hermione. But because everybody has this image and this really strong image of Emma Watson, you know, then they wouldn't accept it, you know, for other reasons too. But it's a companion thing, and I'd rather praise the things that I really dig than be like, oh, I don't like this, so it's all terrible. Just throw it. That's
a very Kevin Smith way of viewing things as well.
Because I want to like things,
right? Yeah.
You know, I can't. The people who trade on just hating things all the time and like that's our whole brand
gets clicks.
What? Yeah, it does get clicks. What an awful way to live life.
Yeah, I'm gonna put this one. Tony Meade hates music to be the title. Right. Hates your music or something.
Yeah, he hates your favorite stuff.
Yeah, that's how I found Wheel of Time. I saw the Amazon series and then I went back and I listened to the books. So good. I love that the actress lady's doing them now, it's a whole different way of thinking about it. I don't know. I enjoy it quite a bit, and I enjoyed the Andy Serkis versions of the Lord of the Rings. I know I haven't listened to it yet.
But I've listened. I've heard like little snippets of it. I think it's. I mean, I know Corey doesn't like it.
It's fun. You know,
I think it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, he is doing impressions of the actors and stuff. So I mean, that does really like solidify the thing you're saying. Was like, you know, you want to see this person as that character. But you know,
well, like there's the official ones, or the old official ones, which are the Rob Inglis ones, which are great, and you can't fault them. Classic. But I really love the unofficial one that what was his name? Oh God,
it's not official. Then
what's his name? I can't think of his name right now. Anyway, he did this really great version of the books where he did the text as just like the unabridged versions were, but he did the voices of the people in the actors. He did the voices, so like Pippin, he does the Scottish voice like Billy Boyd, you know. Okay. So he's doing that, and he's also using the music, and he's using the sound effects.
Okay.
So it's like
it's a big project.
Yeah, it's a huge project. Phil Dragash, Dragash, or how you pronounce his name. And it's amazing. And you find a lot of people who do like lore videos will use his version because it's not copyrighted.
Interesting.
When they want to do quotes from the text and stuff like that. And it's also just really great. It's a really great, really immersive. There's a great thing at the end of Return of the King where he does the scene with the actor with doing the actor's voices but he has Into the West playing. And he lets the entirety of Into the West play at the end of the book. And it's just like, oh yeah, like I get why that soundtrack is so powerful.
Yeah.
Because you put it next to that text, and it's like, it was very much a labor of love, you know.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
it's like it's something like obviously he can't make money off of it, and you know they've tried to take it down a million times, but it keeps surviving because it's the internet and
Yeah.
internet lives forever. But there's something about it that just really I really dig. I really like it.
Yeah, I guess I was didn't even let you say last thing. Any other fantasy thing that you think isn't getting enough love, you'd like to get more love, or where can people or anything you'd suggest?
Not really. I mean, I would definitely encourage people to give Rings of Power a chance.
Yeah.
Give the
I'm
new Star
excited
Wars
for season 2.
Yeah, well, you know, I am too, but I'm trying to avoid any of the discourse about it. But also like, you know, the new Star Wars stuff, don't get so caught up in canon. You know, because what is canon
anymore?
I mean, like the biblical canon isn't set and it's been around for 2,000 years. Like, you know,
have you listened to any of those High Republic books?
I haven't yet.
Again,
but I was
it's
interested.
YA,
I was
good.
interested in, you know, what they were. I went back and did enough like learning about what had gone before so I would understand, you know, the stuff in the Acolyte, like Vernestra Row and all that.
Yeah.
But and that's something I need to.
I've listened to a couple and I enjoy them, but
Mm-hmm. There's so much stuff out there.
Yeah.
Man. There's so much stuff. I mean, I was one of those people who was like the early adopter of the expanded universe.
Okay.
Yeah, because I remember when the first Thrawn book came out, you know, the 91. And the thing that struck me about the book at the time, having seen the movies growing up and stuff, was like how much he got the voices of those characters. Like you read that book and you heard Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher. Like you heard them in those, you know, it was just, you heard it.
Cool.
You know, it was that one thing that I thought was really great. And it's like, yeah, I kind of do want to know what happened. Like, you know, after the story.
Sure, yeah.
You know, there's a lot of really fun things in that book too, where I think it's one of the opening scenes, the opening scene with Luke. And Luke has his sort of last encounter with Obi-Wan, right? Before he goes off into the ether, I guess. And he's drinking this thing and he's like, what is this called again? And he's talking to 3PO and he's like, I think it's called chocolate. So it's like this weird, it's like, is Zahn trying to say that there's some kind of connection with Earth in this? You know, like, is he trying to say like, because it's chocolate and Luke has never heard of it, is like this some backdoor kind of connection to, you know,
long ago, a galaxy far, far away.
Yeah, like,
maybe. Yeah. Who knows?
So it's just really
it's interesting.
Fun little things in there like that. Yeah.
No, yeah, it makes me want to maybe pick it up and listen next time I have a Audible credit.
Well,
or something.
especially given that they're making this Thrawn movie eventually,
right,
with the Mandalorian, and they're kind of retelling that story, but in the new canon, but keeping as much of it as they can.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Keeping as much as they can and
as they can.
Thank you. Anyway. All right. Yeah. Where can people find you? Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it.
So you can find me at TonyMeade.com. That's my main website, and all the socials at Tony Meade Music, except Twitter, which is just Tony Meade. And I'm in the process of writing a bunch of new stuff right now. I just put out a EP of covers not too long ago.
Covers, you're saying, very popular
which is the first time I've ever done that. All the stuff I've put out, except for the Christmas album, it's all been original music. I have 3 full-length albums and 2 EPs, all original music. I just put out this EP of covers, which is called The Impossible Dream, because it's one of the songs that's on it. And I have a single that I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do it yet, but I'm going to release a version, probably just nonprofit, for Christmas, of Tolkien's poem Noel.
Okay.
Which was discovered in the last 10 years or so. So I did a musical interpretation of that. And so that's going to come out at Christmas time. Probably just nonprofit.
You love Christmas.
I do like me some Christmas. Actually, I did a podcast called Christmas Clatter.
Oh.
When the Christmas album came out, and which was all about Christmas music. And
interesting.
Yeah, it was really cool. It was a really fun interview because I get to talk about like all the things that I like about Christmas.
Yeah,
and, you know, the symbolism of light and the darkness and all this kind of stuff.
So
it was pretty cool. So I'm gonna, so that's coming out in December, and then the plan is for next year to start releasing a bunch of singles that will eventually culminate in an album, a new album. So yes, that's what's happening with me.
Cool. Yeah. And do you give out your socials?
So everything's Tony Meade Music, all one word. Yeah. And also if you're in Denver, we'll be doing Fort Collins Comic-Con next weekend, the 17th. I'll be doing 2 panels, one on Tolkien's languages and the other on hobbits. and then I'll be doing hopefully a nerd night at the end of September, where I'll also be doing the same panel on Hobbits.
And it's like a monthly thing?
It's a
or
monthly
like-
thing. It's the last Friday of the month at the Buck Theater.
Okay.
And it's great. It's a great night out. It's really cheap. It's like, $5-10 or something like that. Great night out. Really fun, chill. Everybody's really funny. It's like TED Talks with booze. Yeah.
So they talk about a bunch of different stuff, not just like literature.
A lot of STEM stuff, like science and also like
STEM cider.
Kind of
STEM is like science and
like science, technology, electronics, and something else.
Okay.
Music. There's something I can't remember what it is, but scientists, kind of science stuff.
Okay.
But also like pop culture stuff, and then sometimes like sociology type things. Like politics and stuff like that. So it's really cool. So we'll be doing that, and then the rest of the year is basically me writing and recording, and I'll be doing a lot more YouTube stuff as well. So
well, yeah. I'll let the guests sign us off as they see fit. The culmination of this experience for you, if you will. I will say, Wakanda forever, be excellent to each other, and whatever you want to say, sign us off.
Let me see. What do I want to say? That's really profound. Well, I'm back.
All right. Thank you.